Alright everyone, I want to welcome you to today's video. So today we're going to answer the question, will Trump get rid of Medicaid or cut the benefits? We're going to talk a little bit about that today, and I want to preface this video by saying, number one, I am no way, shape, or form trying to demean or belittle or anybody that is in any type of these welfare programs, whether it be Social Security, Disability, Medicaid, or whatever. I do believe there is a definite need for these programs. Have they been abused? Of course they have. We can all see that. But we definitely need to have that safety net for those who are less fortunate among us in the United States. And that number is constantly growing. So I definitely feel like we need that. But we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I don't want my words to be misconstrued. So right now, this is a big fear. It's big in the news because of DOGE and Elon Musk and Trump making all these government cuts. Well, if we look at the reality of things, they haven't really cut the programs. They haven't really cut any kind of programs. Matter of fact, the billionaires are still getting their multi-billion-dollar contracts, and I think Elon just got awarded something new. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, they're not getting rid of a lot of these programs. What they're doing is they're going in and cutting the labor. That's what we've seen so far. They've been cutting employees, firing employees to cut their labor cost. And apparently they're setting up different IT solutions in place to try to streamline these entities, these government entities, and that way they can justify why they have gotten rid of all these government employees. So that's what we're really seeing right now. So, you know, I don't know. Are they going to go further with it? I don't know. But what I can say is I'm going to give you reasons today of why they probably will not. So before we even get started, let's go ahead and discuss some misconstrued or misinterpreted terms and just talk about some of these programs, because I know there's a lot of that. Whenever I was on the police department, the guys I worked with, a lot of the guys I worked with really had no idea what some of these programs were. And they just kind of blanketed into one term called welfare. Well, welfare is a correct terminology to some degree. And really that's kind of a broad term that includes the umbrella of Social Security, Disability, Medicaid, SNAP, all these different programs that are there to help those who are less fortunate among us. Where I think we get into a lot of misunderstanding is some of the actual programs and what they are and everything else. So let's just look at, you know, the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. I've got these written down, so I'm reading here. So Medicare is, if you look at the eligibility of it, it's generally for those who are 65 and older and some younger individuals with disabilities or end-stage renal disease, kidney failures, some things like that. Funding primarily comes from the federal government. The coverage includes inpatient hospital care, which is the Part A, outpatient medical services, which is Part B, and prescription drug coverage, which is Part D, with optional private insurance plans, which that's what you always see advertised on TV is the Part C. The cost, enrollees typical pay premiums and deductibles and copays, kind of like your insurance, right? And the administration is done through the federal government. Now, Medicaid is a little bit different. The eligibility is based on income and resources, typically for low-income individuals and families, regardless of age. Funding is a joint endeavor. It comes from the federal and state governments. Coverage, it can vary state by state, but generally includes a wide range of medical services, including inpatient and outpatient care, and may cover long-term care services and prescription drugs. The cost, Beneficiaries typically don't pay premiums, deductibles, or copays for covered services. In other words, it's totally free. Administration is done by state governments under federal guidelines. So you see the difference, and I know we even see politicians get those two terms and those two programs confused with one another. So the main one we're going to be looking at is Medicaid, because that kind of applies to this umbrella of terms of welfare, right? Let's look at the benefits. Just a simple Google search will tell you that the average person on Social Security disability, and again, maybe we should look at the term. Social Security disability insurance is different from your Social Security that you get when you turn 62, or you can start getting when you turn 62. Big difference in that. Social Security disability is it's Social Security, but it's for those who qualify for it. And there is a qualification where you have to meet certain circumstances, or you got to check the boxes for these things, right? And we'll cover that here in just a minute. And it's a whole different deal. But the average person that's on Social Security disability will get paid about $1,580 a month in 2025. This is up from $40. They've given a COLA of $40 per month in 2025. Now, why is Social Security disability an important thing? Because that's what we see a lot of people on nowadays. Being a police officer and working in the police service for 20 years, the majority of the people out there that I saw who were under the umbrella of the welfare system were on Social Security disability for one reason or another. Of course, this was put into place back in the 1960s, but it was greatly expanded in the 1980s and then further on. Matter of fact, it was Ronald Reagan who kind of started the ball rolling on a lot of this stuff, especially with Medicaid. Ronald Reagan is one who increased Medicaid to include even illegals if they qualified financially for it. So you could, they could walk into a hospital and be treated and things like that. And I'm not sitting here trying to point fingers, because both political parties, both of the mainstream political parties in the United States are responsible for this. This has been a joint effort. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So anyway, going back, I kind of got a little bit off track there, but going back, your average person on Social Security disability in the United States, and this can vary state by state depending on, the cost of living and so on, but your average person, just generally speaking, and this is a Google search number, is $1,580 per month. Now, on the SNAP benefits, again, this is something that we see that is done through the state, but it is funded by the federal government, right? There's probably some funding with the state governments also. But your average person that is receiving SNAP benefits is receiving about $202 per month per person. Now, they give also an average for a family of four on my Google search, right? And your average for a family of four is going to run you about $715 a month. Another thing that we need to look at is Section 8 housing. This is government housing. That is, at least in the state of Oklahoma, we see more and more of this type of government-assisted housing. Other than having these, big blocks of apartments that are all owned by the state or a city or whatever, we just see that these privately owned apartment complexes will reserve a portion, if not all, of their housing, and it's reserved for government-assisted housing, which is Section 8 housing. And this is all done through the federal government, and they have to meet federal guidelines and things like that. But basically, people who qualify for this receive a drastically reduced rent, and if not completely free, and they also get reduced utilities and so on. Now, does this mean that the private company is not getting the rent? No, that means that the government is now paying that private company who owns that apartment complex or that housing facility. They're paying them their full price. It's just that the benefit to the person who qualifies for this, the poor person, for lack of a better word here, is that they get reduced, if not free rent. So now that we've seen some of the benefits that these individuals who qualify for these programs get, roughly, if you're looking at a person who is on SSDI, and this is a common thing that I saw as a police officer whenever I was working and I was having to go into these complexes, and for one reason or another. But most of the time, this was the story. It was the person who qualified for the Section 8 housing. They were also on Medicaid, and they received SNAP benefits, and they had SSDI. So in other words, they had free medical care. They were getting right now in 2025, they're getting about $1,580 a month on top of, for an individual, another $202 per month on their SNAP benefits. So if you want to total that all up, that's a pretty good amount of money. You're talking about just in cash received and in a check received, you're getting about $1,700 per month. So another thing to think about is a lot of this, if not all of it, is tax-free. They don't have to pay state or federal taxes on any of this stuff, right? So now let's just do a little bit of a comparison on some of these folks that are actually working, and they're working the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. And this will come into play here in just a minute when I start talking about some further things, okay? So just bear with me on this. So a person making $7.25 an hour, if they are lucky enough to work a 40-hour work week, because as we all know, most employers will not work people who are making minimum wage a full 40-hour work week, because that way they don't have to provide health insurance for them, right? They don't have to do that. So they can hire them as a part-time employee, and they don't have to give them that benefit of health insurance. So, but let's just say they are lucky enough to get 40 hours a week in at their employer. After they pay their taxes, because they do have to pay their taxes, they're going to be looking at making roughly about $1,134 a month. So they're making considerably less than these people who are on benefits. Now, a lot of you guys are going to be sitting out there going, by God, this is just flat out wrong. We need to take all these people, sucking off the government teat and just get rid of them, and we could solve a lot of problems. Well, no, you're not going to solve a lot of problems by kicking the poorest of the poor down, right? And we're going to talk about some remedies to what needs to happen here. There is no good answer, but we're going to talk about some remedies that might be able to help. But I think one of the first things that we need to do is look at the true beneficiaries of the welfare programs, right? And so let's just take a look at some of these. And a lot of this, you got to think about it, and you got to follow the money. I say this at the end of all my shorts: follow the money and think about it. And you really have to follow the money and think about it. Gary Stevenson with Gary's Economics. If you haven't watched any of his videos, he's a good one to watch. And he gives a good layman's explanation of how this money goes down the pipeline and then back up to the billionaires, the people who own the wealth in our country. And this is another example of how that is done. This is just one little microcosm of it, and it's done through the welfare system. And it'll help you better understand maybe why things are the way they are. Because, a lot of people don't even think about this. They just get angry at people sucking off the government teat, right? And instead, they don't understand why these programs are in place. They think it's just because you've got a bunch of bleeding heart progressive liberals out there that just want to give everybody's money away. That's not the case. That is absolutely not the case, because a lot of these same bleeding heart liberals that you want to describe are part of the problem. They've been part of the problem all along. So let's take a look and see who the real beneficiaries are. So I want you to think about this, and this is where I'm going to go into a little bit of storytelling time. But let's just say I'm a doctor, and I've got a patient that comes in to me all the time, and they've got some type of a problem, whether it's a bad back or something like that. They're going through these problems, these medical health problems. Well, I'm going to be very incentivized as a doctor to try to put this person on Social Security disability, so that they can get some help, right? Instead of maybe thinking about a different line of help for them, whether it's, losing some weight. Maybe part of their back problems because they have the high obesity rate in the United States, right? A lot of their problems, their knee problems or their joint problems are caused by, being overweight. Well, as a doctor, instead of saying, hey, a lot of your problems can be alleviated if you'll lose some weight, we're going to try to help you out with that. We're going to go with some preventative health care here to try to help you with that. But if I'm receiving a lot of my money from Medicaid through my practice here, then I'm going to be going, well, this is guaranteed money, right? I don't have to fight with an insurance company. All I got to do is just make sure I'm within the guidelines of Medicare, and I've got guaranteed money from the federal government. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go this other route where I'm going to be looking at federal government money. And this patient is going to be very, very grateful to me that now they don't have to work this minimum wage job, but now they can go sit at home and in comfort and watch TV, play video games or whatever. In other words, they don't have to get out there and stand behind a counter or go out there and dig ditches or anything like that. They can be a little bit more comfortable at home, and they're going to make more money. And so because of this patient being grateful for that, now they have now become a patient of mine for life because I helped them out, right? And so all I got to do is refer, as my doctor, I got to write up all the paperwork, right, for my patient and make sure it's going to fit all the guidelines so my patient can get on Social Security disability. And then all I got to do is contact my lawyer friend over here and send my patient to my lawyer friend who specializes in getting people on Social Security disability. And we all drive through town and we see these law firms that advertise this, right? They advertise it on the outside of their building, specializing in Social Security disability, because there's big money in this, right? So we can see how doctors and lawyers right off the bat benefit from this whole program, from this welfare program. But let's look at the hospital side of it. So hospitals nowadays are owned almost entirely by big corporations. They're not publicly owned entities anymore where, let's just say, a city or a state owns any of these hospital facilities. They're all privately owned now. And so there's big money in this. Well, as a police officer, I was always having to take people or escort people to the hospital, whether they were combative or something. I was always in an emergency room. Any cop will tell you they're constantly in the emergency room, whether you're sitting on a prisoner or something. And you see a lot of things when you're sitting in these emergency rooms, right? Well, one of the things that I noticed real early on in my career was you would see people come in that had jobs. They had good health insurance. Shoot, even myself, I'd go into if I ever had to go to the emergency room or something like that, I had good health insurance through the city. But one of the first things the doctors will do is say, hey, look, we want to give you this test, give you that test. We want to do this or that treatment, but we need to make sure that your insurance company will cover this. And we're going to take care of you because we don't want you to pay out of your pocket for this. So we're going to make sure that your insurance company will cover this. And as we all know, there's usually a huge long fight. Sometimes now in an emergency room, the fight's not quite as bad because it is an emergency room, but they may decide, no, we're not going to cover that cost. We're going to make you pay for it. And we've seen that whole outrage and how it was played out over the last year, right? I'm not going to go further into that. But we all see, and this has been brought to the forefront of a lot of Americans, the problems with health insurance companies. So on the contrary, you see people walk in there with Medicaid, and they're on Medicaid, and man, these doctors, they can't get a lot of these procedures done fast enough because they all know the guidelines. They know the guidelines of what they can and cannot do. And by God, if you bumped your head when you fell down or whatever, you are guaranteed going to get a CAT scan, if not an MRI. They are going to run every test that they can on you, and you will walk out of there with a boatload of prescriptions. That's just the way it works. And going into a lot of these Section 8 housing on calls and going into these apartments, almost every apartment you would see had this big freaking pile of prescription medication, either sitting on a coffee table or a nightstand or somewhere in the house. And sometimes I would inquire, I would say, hey, what are you taking all this medication for? And a lot of them had no idea why they were taking it. They didn't even take it. Sometimes they sold it, especially if it was a good opiate. They were going to sell that stuff, right? But the bottom line is, all of it was free because they were on Medicaid. And so who is the beneficiary? Who is the end beneficiary of all of this expense? Well, it's the hospital corporations. It's Big Pharma. You know, all that money is going right back up, and it's all guaranteed government money. It's all coming from the taxpayers. Now let's look at Section 8 housing. We've talked a little bit about that already. The beneficiaries of Section 8 housing is usually these private entities that own the apartment complexes. And now we've seen more and more where, you know, private equity firms like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, they own a lot of this stuff, right? They own a lot of this wealth because this is real estate. This is assets, it's real wealth, and they own all that stuff. And so when that money, that taxpayers' money, is given out for this person's Section 8 housing, for their federally assisted housing, where does it end up? It ends up right back up to these large entities like BlackRock and State Street, these private equity firms that own everything. So all that money's rolling right back up. And what is it? It's taxpayers' money. Don't forget about that. It's taxpayers' money. Where do all these big contracts, like from the defense community and everything else, where do all these contracts end up? Same place, right? So another thing we have to look at is when it comes to like SNAP benefits and the money that they get from SSDI, right? This $1,700 maybe that on average people get. Well, where are they spending this $1,700 per month? Well, they're spending it at places like Walmart, heck, 7-Eleven, the gas station down the road that they can walk to and go buy them some snacks or some milk or whatever that might be closer than a Walmart. That's where they're spending it. And, these convenience stores will take these benefit cards. And so that's why you see a lot of the money spent at these places. Well, it's because of the convenience. The convenience store is just right next door. Instead of having to take a bus or a taxi cab or something like that, or even walk to Walmart where it might be a little bit cheaper, they don't care. They're going for the convenience because, you know what, it's not their money. It's taxpayers' money. I'm not trying to denigrate or anything like that, the people who were on it, but this is a fact of life. I'm just telling the truth as it is. And this is why, I'm kind of explaining this from my perspective as a former police officer, because I know a lot of you guys don't get to see a lot of this stuff. The average American is driving straight to work. They're going to work, and then they drive straight home from work. They may stop somewhere. They may stop at the convenience store to put gas in their car to go to work, and they're seeing these people with these SNAP cards or whatever your state, whatever they call it. They're seeing these state benefit cards standing in line in front of them, and they're buying bags of chips and soft drinks and what have you, along with their milk, and it makes us angry. Well, and you're sitting there going, well, you're spending this money in a place that is way more expensive than if you just went to Walmart or one of these dollar discount stores or something like that. Well, one of the big reasons is logistics. It's simple as that. When Walmarts of the world came in and they put all the mom and pop little shops out of business, this is what they created over the last 40 years. So you have a Walmart that is in one part of a town. If you're lucky, you might have a couple of Walmarts in your town, but you don't have any of these little stores, mom and pop stores, that you can just simply walk to from your apartment. But you do have convenience stores that are mass owned by big corporations, and they got them everywhere. And so put yourself in their shoes. It's freaking freezing cold outside. You don't want to walk all the way across town to the Walmart. I don't have money to get a taxi cab, and there's probably not any bus service that can take me over there. So what are my options? Try to hitch a ride with somebody that has a car or whatever, or just walk over here to the convenience store. That is why we see it. Like it or not, that is why things are the way they are. It's the logistics of it. But these logistical problems have been caused by these humongous companies out there that have put small businesses out of business. So anyway, I got a little bit off track there, but my point is who is the beneficiaries? Well, it's anywhere people that are on these under this welfare umbrella where they're spending their benefit money. And if you follow the money, you will see that it's going right back up to the billionaires. It's not going to mom and pop shops or even to local companies. It's going up to the big boys. And so we got to ask ourselves, who is actually gaining the wealth? Now, I'm not saying getting the benefits, but gaining wealth. Who's able to buy things that are giving them wealth, like real estate? Well, that's a simple one. That's a simple question to answer. So the people that are getting these benefits, they're just spending it on daily essentials. They're not going out there and going, hey, I think I'm going to put a portion of this money back and save it back so that I can buy this little plot of land I've had my eye on for the last few years. And maybe in 20 years, I'll go ahead and be able to buy that piece of property. No, they're not doing that. They're buying the essentials of life, food, whatever. And so the people that are gaining wealth from this are the billionaire class, the ones up, where all this money keeps rolling over and over and over. And so what do? Well, they hoard it until they can go out there and they can buy, more wealth, more assets on the cheap. They wait the markets out and they see, oh, okay, the housing market's about to crash over here. So whenever the price of housing comes over here in this market, comes down over here in this market, I'm going to go ahead and go snatch some of that up. Or as we've seen here recently with the volatility in the stock market, that when they see the stock prices go down, that's when they're going to snag up some stock in those businesses. They'll snag them up. So they're buying wealth. They're accumulating wealth. And remember, where is this money coming from? It's coming from the taxpayers. It inevitably comes from the working class of America. Getting back to our original question, will Trump start taking these benefits away or taking money away from Medicaid and some of these other programs? He may start taking a little bit of money away from maybe some of the administrative cost. That's the best I can see, but you can rest assured they're not going to take your benefits away from you, because those benefits, when you spend them, the billionaires, just like we've just talked about, the billionaires are the ones who are the end result getting all of the money and all of the wealth. So that's why I say no, they're not going to take your benefits away. They have, for the last 45 years, been passing laws, implementing these systems so that they can benefit from them, and they can make billions and billions and billions of dollars off of, and they do every year. All these large corporations have been doing this. And so why would they want to take money away from those systems that have been their cash cow for so long? And it makes you wonder, who are the real parasites, right? You know, is it the people that are receiving these benefits? Are they the real parasites? Are they the real problem? Is it people working government jobs? Are they the problem? No, I don't think so. The real problem is the people that are sitting up there accumulating all the wealth on the backs of the taxpayers. And follow the money and see where it goes. And so we're going to bring in the topic of the minimum wage worker again, okay? So you got the old boy that's out there making minimum wage, and we've already kind of seen some prices here. We've seen how much a person making minimum wage brings home a month, which is a little bit over $1,100 a month after taxes. And then we've seen that somebody on Social Security disability with SNAP benefits, they're going to, in actual cash in hand on average in the United States, they're going to bring home about $1,700 a month. So what I'm saying, who is the better benefit to the billionaire? Okay, I get it. The person making $7.25 an hour, they're, giving their time and their labor to these big businesses for a reduced price. And it is a reduced price. It's a price that they shouldn't be getting paid. They should be making a lot more than that, right? But the billionaires have to keep the minimum wage down at that level, because if they don't, then that's going to take money away from them. And this is how it's going to do it. So the guy making $7.25 an hour, he's only bringing home $1,100 something a month. And when he spends that $1,100 and something a month, that's about $600 less a month than what the person on SSDI is making. You see? So the person making $7.25 an hour is less of a wage earner for the billionaire, less of a benefit for the billionaire than the person on SSDI. And so they have to keep these people on SSDI, they have to keep these benefits coming, because if they don't, they're going to lose. You see the math game here? I'm no mathematician, but you see the billionaires are going to lose. So there's more of an incentive to keep people in these programs, these welfare programs, than there is to say, hey, we're kicking you off and making you go to work. So the question of the day is, how do we fix this? Man, I'll tell you what, I don't really have any true answers to this. I think the system has been in place for so long. And you got to understand that while working class Americans have been busy working with their heads down, going to work, running the American rat race, and then when we are interested in politics, we're too busy fighting over some of these other social issues that they want us to fight over. And so we remain divided. That they have been putting these systems in place that is benefiting them, and it's robbing wealth away from the poor and the middle class in the United States. This has been going on for 45 years, if not longer. So how do we fix 45 years worth of systemic change that's taken place? It's going to be very, very hard, especially when you consider the fact that they have passed laws. You're going to have to get a majority of lawmakers that are willing to change those laws. There's some laws that are done in many states that are done by state question, which amends the constitution of that state. One of them, for instance, in the state of Oklahoma, where I'm from, is when they legalized medical marijuana. Now, I'm not here to debate legalized marijuana, but what I'm saying is a lot of Oklahomans did not realize that when they voted yes for that, it amended the state constitution. So in other words, the only way, it can't be legislated away. The only way you can reverse that decision is to put it back to another vote of the people, another state question. I think in California y'all call them propositions. But it's got to be put back to another state question and then voted on again by the people. It can't be legislated away by the lawmakers. And so a lot of these things have been put into place over the last 40 years that benefit the billionaires and benefit the system that they have created. While the average American has just been sitting there with their head in the sand, not really necessarily with their head in the sand, that's a little bit harsh, but they've been too busy living the American rat race to see what's going on around them. And that's all by design, folks, all by design. So it's going to be real difficult. But let's look at some of these things that might be able to help break this system. And is it something that we can do overnight? Absolutely not. It's not going to be done overnight. This has got to be something that is started, number one, with Americans, the working class and the poor of America, deciding, hey, you know what? It's not my fellow working class citizen that is the problem, or it's not my fellow poor citizen that's the problem. It's all these billionaires up there that are buying lawmakers that have created this system. You know, the poor person down here didn't create the system. Nobody created, none of the working class people created this system. We just didn't do anything about it because we didn't know what was going on. But now, people are starting to wake up to these ideas. They're starting to listen to videos like mine and other people that are way more educated than me. I mean, who am I? I'm a nobody, right? But maybe I can kind of give you a little bit of different perspective about things from a layman's term. And that's what I hope to do with this channel, is to help you understand things and tell you some stories, tell you some real life stories. So, yeah, we've got to come together. We've got to come together if we're ever going to start the process. And then after we've come together, we're going to have to start voting in ways that benefit us. Are we going to be able to sit and vote for the typical red and blue? No, we're not. We're going to have to start voting for some of these offshoot parties, whether it's independents or libertarians or whoever. We have got to get past this whole two-party system. So privatization is one of the things that have taken assets and it's taken power away from the people. So just like we were talking about with the hospitals, right? Used to, hospitals were owned by the community, by the state, the city, whatever. Where the community, the citizens had some say-so in how business was done at that hospital, right? They had a board of directors or whatever, but, you know, the citizens, because the money that operated that came from the citizens, it still does, but now it's just given to private hospital corporations. But back then, the money came from the taxpayers, and then they still had some say-so in how that hospital was run. So if you look at the system like over in Great Britain, well, doctors are incentivized, and I probably said that wrong, but they have the incentive of practicing preventative medicine instead of reactive medicine. We've never had national health care in the United States. The best we could have ever done is the citizens owned the hospitals and owned some of these clinics and owned some of this other stuff. And that's where we had at least some say-so. We can talk about this privatization thing when it comes down to public housing, right? I've been in some of these public housing or these Section 8 housing where they're privately owned. And if somebody wants to tell me that government-owned private housing is worse than privately owned public housing, the Section 8 houses, man, I don't know. I'd have to disagree with you on that, because a lot of them are in really bad shape. They're not taken care of. It's like these private companies will do the bare minimum just to keep the federal funds coming, and that's it. And so a lot of these places are not very nice. They're not the most livable places in the world. And why is that? It's because these companies are private and their main goal is making a profit for their shareholders. So another thing I think that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to get serious about voting in lawmakers who are serious about breaking up these quasi-monopolies that we see in our country nowadays. We have these industry leaders. You can take, just say, the beef industry or the meat industry, where they're owned by just maybe 2 or 3 companies. Well, these companies are basically quasi-monopolies. They're definitely doing monopolistic tactics to make sure that they stay top dogs, whether it comes to regulating their competition out or even price setting. So we've got to get rid of this. We've got to bust these things up, because if you do this, then these companies aren't going to be so powerful. Right now we have companies out there that are too big to fail. If you don't remember, back at 2008, we saw a lot of this, where taxpayers were bailing out these big banks, these big banking corporations, and then they also had to do some bailouts for the automakers too. So we can't have these companies so big that they just can't fail. That's a part of our problem too. And if you look at this whole chain, this whole system that they have created with the taxpayer money going down to the poor and then back up to these quasi-monopolistic companies, you see the problem. They're getting all the wealth. And guys, we really have to address this whole idea of taxing wealth and not wages. I don't think there's even a simple answer when it comes down to this. So even if you tax the wealth of these billionaires and these big corporations and everything else, right? And you've got this tax money, well, you're going to have to ensure that there are government employees, lawmakers, everything else that ain't just going to give that money right back to them, right? And that's one of the big problems that we're going to see, is that, okay, we can tax them all we want to, and they're just be, okay, I'll pay it, and then it just goes right back to them in the form of government contracts or any other billionaire welfare systems that we have, right? I mean, and we all see that. So we got to have non-corrupt politicians that are going to make sure that happens and make sure that it gets down to the poorest and the least among us, right? We've also got to find some way of incentivizing these corporations and these employers to increase wages. Whether it's raise the federal minimum wage or incentivize them somehow, whether it is through taxes or some other type of means to increase working class wages. We've got to get it to where people are incentivized to go, you know what, I'm better off if I go work instead of get on SSDI or some other welfare program. Right now, there's too much incentive to get on the welfare programs. And just as we've seen, that's the system that the billionaires want. That's the system that they have put in place over the last 45 years. But if we want to change that and we want to put people to work, and I get it, we've got to be able to create the jobs too, but we also got to make it worth people's while to go out there and do those jobs. You know, right now there's this big stink saying, well, you know, farmers, they got crops rotting in the field because there's no migrant workers to go work. Well, maybe we should use some of that government money to do this. Maybe we should pay a little bit more to these farmers so that they could actually pay a living wage to Americans to go work those fields. I don't know, guys. I know there's a lot of caveats to this whole deal and a lot of questions and a lot of things that can come up, and there's no easy answer. I totally understand that. But maybe that would be a better use of the money instead of just giving it, right? But incentivize people to go out there and work. Because what's going to happen is if you see this wealth distribution continue on the way it is, where the rich just keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer, what we're going to end up seeing is the United States become nothing more than another third world country. I live in one of those countries. I live in a developing country to where, yeah, you may have the economic freedom to go out there and start up, a business and have entrepreneurial freedom to go start these businesses up. But if you don't have any customers out there that can afford to buy your product, your business is going to fail. And this is something I don't think the billionaires have even, surely they've had to figure this out. I don't understand. But there's going to come a point in time when, okay, these goods that you are selling, there's got to be a customer for them. And when people can't afford even the tech stuff like Netflix and Prime Video and all this other stuff out there, who are you going to sell your product to? You've got to keep the working class of your country wealthy enough to afford things, to become part of that consumerism. I'm not saying all consumerism is bad, but when people are having to go into serious amounts of debt to stay in the consumerism game, we got a problem. And that's exactly what we have right now in the United States. Everybody is just inundated with debt. All they're doing is paying interest on debt. And what happens whenever, you get laid off or whatever, and that paycheck ain't coming? Now you're in some serious straits. All right, guys, again, there's no easy answer to this. How do we get ourselves out of these messes that have been put into place for the last 45 years or beyond? It's going to be very, very difficult. But I hope I'm giving you guys something to think about, something to ponder on. And we have got to start coming together as a society of poor and middle class folks. Because, again, the billionaires up there, they're not like us. They don't think like us. They don't have the same struggles as us. They don't look at life like we do. And the bottom line is, the American dream is going to be gone. It's already dwindling away if we don't start reversing that pendulum right now. We've got to start swinging that pendulum back the other way. And if we don't, it's going to be a real sad situation. All right, guys, I appreciate y'all tuning in. If you like what I'm doing, hit the thumbs up. If you don't, hit the thumbs down. Leave a comment. I'll address your comments. All right, thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.